Good morning. Good morning. Welcome to Kane University. My name is Anthony Pittman. I am the Acting Dean of Education here at the College of Education at Kane University. You did not sleep the morning late, nor get up when you pleased. For students awaited your arrival in schools across New Jersey. You were on time, you gave your best to all you came to know. You challenged them to learn some things. Yes, you challenged them to grow. At times, they'd listen to your every word, and most times they would abide by rules and expectations that some others may let slide. But not all of them would come to you determined to be taught. Some had major problems. Yes, some were quite distraught by cares of life, by little things, and great big problems too. But you lent your listening ear to them, and they opened up to you. They'd test your patience now and then to see how strong you'd be. But you resolved to teach them still, their futures you could see. You'd find that every student was special and unique. You'd capture their attention when their interests needed piquing. You did not sleep the morning late, nor get up when you pleased, for students awaited your arrival in schools across New Jersey. You encouraged them to give their best, and yes, you gave your best too. And in so doing, you represent the profession of teaching strong and true. Ladies and gentlemen, that was an original orientation to welcome you to our university, and we hope that you have a great conference today. It is my pleasure to introduce our Provost and Vice President for Academic Affairs, Dr. Jeffrey H. Toney, who will bring words on behalf of our President. Dr. Toney.
Thank you, Dean Pittman. This is so awesome to see a great turnout for our first Thought Leaders Educational Conference. I know President Fry, he wanted to be here, but it's my honor to say a few words on his behalf. I first wanted to point out this beautiful new facility, the North Avenue Academic Building. This is one example of many of his vision of a way to provide our students at the university the very best that we possibly can. So I hope you'll get a chance to appreciate this facility. I hope for those of you who are new to the campus have a chance to take a tour, go across the street, see Liberty Hall, see our beautiful facilities, and get a sense and the feel of what a wonderful environment this university is. I wanted to acknowledge that this is Teacher Appreciation Week, for those of you who weren't aware. And I think it's fair to say that none of us would be in this room if it weren't for great and dedicated, passionate teachers. So I'm delighted that there are students here. I see a number of high schools are represented. So I would ask that you acknowledge the great teachers in the room. So if you could please say your thank you. And I want to acknowledge Dean Pittman's dedication to making this conference a success. Also to Valerie Winslow, who heads up our conferencing and services. And of course, Dr. Lamont Repollet, who's superintendent of Asbury Park Schools. And also Board of Trustee member for the university. So thank you so much for your dedication and passion to leading us to the next level and establishing ourselves as a leader in higher education in the state. I just wanted to share with you a brief example of what I think being a good teacher is all about. Some of you may be aware that we do produce a very large number of certified teachers within the state. Next week we have our undergraduate and graduate commencement, and I was informed that for the undergraduate commencement we will be celebrating over 350 certified teachers who will receive their bachelor's in teacher education. We have over 100 dedicated teachers that will be receiving their master's and ED degrees at the graduate ceremony. We're also very proud that Kean University has produced not only a large number of teachers within the state, but some of the best teachers, having been recognized as the New Jersey Teacher of the Year for the state for several years. One of them a few years back was Lauren Morocco, a young lady who I had the privilege to meet. And I just wanted to share a little perspective about the importance of what we do as educators. I met with her and I congratulated her for being recognized as Teacher of the Year. And I said to her, not only am I so happy and proud of what you've done, but you've done something that I've never done in my professional career, even though you may think I've had some successes. And she said, well, what's that? And I said, well, you had the President of the United States shake your hand and thank you for being a good teacher, and that's something I haven't done, and that makes me happier than you can even imagine. So I think it's a lesson for all of us that we want to see our students reach levels beyond what we have achieved, and that's what being an educator is all about, right? So I'm going to pass this on to our generous sponsor, Lee & Low Books, and before I get to that, I just wanted to emphasize that I hope that you learn a lot and you're inspired by the transformational leaders that we have at this conference. We have amazing people like Dr. Noguera, who has done incredible work to turn around schools. I have no doubt we're going to be inspired and we're going to learn a lot from him. And I wanted each of you to think, as you're listening to these speakers, that as you go forward, all of us should be measuring our success by the students' success. That, I think, is the key. So this conference is not about teachers. It's about how to give students a support system so that they can achieve their dreams. And if we do that, we will have succeeded. So, Abe Beretta, thank you so much for your support on behalf of the university. This event would not have been possible without your dedication. So, thank you, sir.
I know you guys can do a thunderous round of applause for that. Can you give it up for Kean, Asbury Park, Doc? I'm a little humbled and excited for what's going to happen today. How many of you, show of hands, have a smartphone? All right. We're going to encourage everybody. You know how they say put your phones away. We want you to take pictures. We want you to tweet. If you can see the hashtag on the bottom left of the screen, can you read what that says? Come on, a little gusto. This is New Jersey. Leading 17. I want you to hashtag all day. You're at a session. You're going to hear amazing remarks from Dr. Pedro Noguera. I want you to take pictures of the day, tweet it, Instagram, Facebook. We want to have this trending by noon, all right? A lot of work and effort has been put in, and we want to kind of share this day with everybody.
It's not working. It's not turning on.
I am particularly honored to be here introducing my dear friend, Dr. Pedro Noguera. Just to give you some stats, Dr. Noguera is a distinguished professor of education at the Graduate School of Education and Information Sciences at UCLA. His research focuses on the ways in which schools are influenced by social and economic conditions as well as by their demographic trends in local, regional, and global contexts. He's the author of 11, can you count it? 11 books and over 200 articles and monographs. He serves on the board of numerous and national and local organizations and appears as a regular commentator on educational issues on CNN, MSNBC, NPR, and other national news outlets. Too many for me to, because that would take a whole session if I do all his accolades. Prior to joining the faculty at UCLA, he served as a tenured professor and holder of endowed chairs at New York University, Harvard University, the University of California, Berkeley, and he has served as a trustee for the State University of New York. As an appointee of the governor in 2014, he was elected to the National Academy of Education. He recently received awards from the Center of Advanced Study of Behavioral Sciences and the National Association of Secondary Principals from the McSilver Institute at NYU for his research and advocacy efforts aimed at fighting poverty. What you don't know is that he's a Leo. He is a grill master, and he's a pretty decent salsa dancer. It is my great pleasure to introduce to you my friend, Dr. Pedro Noguera. Please welcome me in joining him.
I got mine. Good morning. It's great to be here, and thank you all for coming out. I'm particularly happy to see so many students here. Let's give it up for the students that are with us today. I want to thank Keene University for serving as the host. I know you're a leader in education, and I appreciate that you are providing this kind of a venue for educators in this region to come together to do some thinking about how do we make sure we're serving all of our students. I also want to say a big thank to Asbury Park that came up with the idea of bringing us together like this, and for their leadership. And finally, I want to say big thanks to Lee and Lowe and my friend Abe, because Lee and Lowe has been a leader in the field of providing diverse books from a broad cross-section of our society that is too often not available to our children. And as you'll see from the titles outside, if you want kids to read, you got to give them something they'll want to read. And having experiences that affirm who they are is essential to turning our kids into readers. My father, who didn't graduate from high school, taught us you can get a free education with a library card. And he practiced it. So although he didn't have formal education, he was well read. And I know that if we could get every one of these kids, not just the ones who are here, but the ones we serve in our schools, simply reading, you know what would happen to test scores and achievement? It'd go way up. Right? So it's that simple. So I'm here to tell you today that with good news, that we have evidence that we can educate all kinds of children. And that evidence comes from actual schools. I can name schools right now in America that serve homeless kids well, that serve kids in foster care well, that serve the unaccompanied, undocumented minors well, that serve black children, Latino children, Asian children, white children. I can name it. I visit those schools. I was at a school on Tuesday in Oakland, a Montessori school. All the children, children of color, all the children low income, all the children 5 years old performing at the 4th grade level in reading and math, at 5. Now let's talk about the environment they've created that makes that possible. I sat and watched kids making each other lunch. And I said, who's making lunch today? They said, the kids make lunch. They take turns making lunch for each other. And throughout the day, if a kid gets hungry, they can go get more food. I said, wow. You know how many kids are in school hungry because they didn't get breakfast? Right? Or who have poor nutrition because they're stuffing themselves with junk food? Right? And therefore they can't even sit still because they're high on Coca-Cola? Right? When you go to a school where you see kids performing, what you also see is a holistic vision of the child. They're not just focused on their achievement, they're focused on their well-being. That's what equity is about. Equity starts from the premise that you can't serve a child well if you ignore their other needs. Because the academic needs, the emotional, the psychological, the physical, they're all integrated. They're all in the same person. If they haven't had a good night's sleep, they're not going to do well in school. if they don't have a stable home environment, they're probably not going to do so well in school. It sounds basic, it sounds simple, except that we tend to ignore that in our schools. Which children are the ones who do least well? The children with the greatest needs. That's the consistent finding. We talk about the achievement gap. The achievement gap is about an opportunity gap. Many of our kids lack basic opportunities. The opportunity to thrive, the opportunity to have a good meal and good nutrition, the opportunity to fulfill their aspirations. It's so obvious, but it is often so ignored. I like to point out to people, homework is an equity issue. How many of you help your own kids with homework? Even when you're tired, and even when you don't understand it, you're there with them. And you ever see those kids, they come into school the next day with that paper, looks like a lawyer worked on it? Because their dad is a lawyer. And how many of you have kids right now that have no one to help them with homework? They have no place even to do the homework. May not have a computer to get online. How do we account for those differences? If we don't, then what happens? The kids with the greatest needs continue to be the kids who fall furthest behind. Now, as I said, my father didn't graduate from high school. Neither did my mother. They sent all 6 of us to college. Harvard, Brown, Cornell, 2 at Berkeley. Living proof, your background should not determine what you can accomplish in education. All right? Ask yourself this, I'll ask this. How many of you come from a family where neither parent graduated from college? Look around the room. Neither parent graduated from high school. More hands. All of us show us evidence that your background should not determine what you can accomplish. Now, ask yourself, when I go into classrooms in schools, is it the backgrounds of the kids that's driving their achievement? Is it only the affluent kids who are showing up in the gifted classes, in the honors classes? Or do I see kids who come from families that are struggling there too? Because there's talent in the projects, isn't there? And not just at basketball. There's talent in the trailer parks. There's talent in all kinds of communities. And you know who knows it best? Our coaches. Because we will find a football player or a basketball player anywhere. If we cared as much, we could find engineers and poets and writers. We could find them in the same neighborhoods. It's all a question about cultivating talent in children, which is why we have to have an equity lens. But equity confuses people. Confuses people because they confuse it with equality. Right? Not the same. So many of you have seen this picture by now, right? It's a little blurry, trying to look over the fence on the same level step. Short people can't see. You have to adjust the step so they can all see. Anybody who has more than one child practices equity at home. I have 5, so I'm an expert. I love them all, but they're all different. Here we are, trying to eat together. We got a few extras with us. It's hard. The oldest one with that hat on, he eats more than me. He's big. The third one, he's vegan. No meat, no dairy. The 5th one, she doesn't even eat. She doesn't like food. You got to chase her to get her to eat. The goal is not to eat the same. The goal is for everyone to eat. Make sense? So what does it look like in school? Well, one of the things it doesn't look like is lowering standards. Where we say, pobrecito, you come from a poor family, you don't have to do this work. It's too hard for you. No, that's not equity. You know what that is? That's what George Bush called the soft bigotry of low expectations. That was profound, huh? Not sure if you knew what it meant, but it was profound. But lowering the bar does not help them, because in the long run, they got to compete with everybody else. They got to compete with everybody else. So it's not about lowering standards or expectations. It's also about not making excuses. And it certainly isn't about only an issue for kids who are poor or schools like Asbury Park that serve lots of kids of color. It's for every school in America. Because even in your affluent schools, there are equity issues. Kids with depression, kids who have drug problems, kids who have eating disorders. As soon as you start to think about our kids, you realize that, guess what? All of our kids have needs and issues. And if we only focus on the academic needs, we're going to produce people who are really not ready to function as adults in society. There was a really profound letter from a Holocaust survivor. A letter written to his teacher, and I'll paraphrase. It says, "Dear teacher, I'm suspicious of education." It says, "I'm suspicious of education because the people who designed the gas chambers were well-educated engineers. And the doctors who tortured us were also highly educated. And all the people who ran this system, this concentration camp, went to school, went to colleges. That an education that's not rooted in ethics and values will produce more Eichmanns." Who are the kids we're serving? Are they really going to be ready to be responsible adults? Are they really going to be ready to be educated voters who can distinguish between fake news and real news? An education that doesn't prepare you to live in this country is not adequate. So we have to think about not just the whole child, but what they need to become responsible adults in society. And equity forces us to do that. And so I want to acknowledge it's hard. It's hard because we live in such an unequal society. And so we're trying to compensate for inequity. And there's a reason why so many of the schools that are struggling the most are the schools that are serving the poorest kids. Because those kids will come with extra needs. And simply telling teacher that, well, you teacher have to be the social worker, and you also have to be the surrogate parent, and you also have to do what you can to mentor and guide these students. That's a lot on a teacher, for which they don't even have the training, much less the time. So part of equity work means that we have to build partnerships. So we don't expect our teachers to do it all by themselves, or our schools. And one of the people we have to partner with is the parents in our community, because we need their support to have an impact on our kids. When we think about how to create the environment, and the schools I'm going to describe in a moment have succeeded at this, an environment where good teaching and learning is occurring, where kids are thriving, where kids are motivated. It's a lot like creating a garden where everything's growing. I'm a gardener. I'm very proud of my garden. I got my strawberries coming in. I got my tomatoes starting. I live in Los Angeles, so we have a longer growing season. It's been warm for a while. I know you're jealous, but that's the way it is. Now when my peppers don't come in the way I wanted to, I don't go out there and start yelling at them. Blaming the peppers will not help. I have to say, I did something wrong. Maybe I didn't get the fertilizer right. Maybe there's not enough water, or too much water, not enough sun. The conditions for growth aren't there. What's the analogy? When you go to a school and you see certain kids not achieving, not thriving, if you blame the kids, it's like blaming the peppers. If you blame their parents, it's like blaming the peppers. You have to ask yourself, have we gotten the conditions right? Because if you don't get the conditions right, guess what? Then they don't thrive. And what are those essential conditions? Right at the top of the list, safety. And I don't just mean physical safety, I mean emotional safety, psychological safety. Is it a safe environment to ask questions, to make mistakes? You learn through your mistakes, don't you? And a lot of the bullying today, where does it occur? It occurs on Facebook, not face-to-face. So do we really have a safe learning environment, an orderly learning environment? Can't learn in chaos. And I go to school sometimes where it's chaotic because there's an absence of moral authority in the schools. Moral authority is not about your title, your position, it's about your relationship with the children. Do they know that you're a person who should be respected? Do you actually set an example? Because our kids are watching us. They're watching, you know that? They're watching all the time. They know if you don't like them. They know if you're afraid of them. They know if you have favorites. They know if you wore the same shirt 2 days in a row. That's how close they're watching. I had a teacher said, my students knew before my husband that I got my hair done. That's how close they watch. So what are you modeling for the kids? My question. What are we modeling as educators? Because to be an educator is to be a role model. Right? Part of the job. And so the essential conditions are about building the relationships to create a culture in the schools. A culture that's conducive to teaching and learning. A culture where the kids believe it's cool to be smart. Do they believe it? Or do they believe it's cool to be a jerk? It's cool to be someone who doesn't study. It's cool, it's acceptable to get D's and turn in slop. Because you can pass with that. Your teachers don't care enough to demand more. And you know what happens if we accept slop? They'll keep giving it to us. They'll keep giving it to us because they say, oh, they like slop. I could do this all day. No one's demanded more. Ask your students, how hard are they working? A lot of them aren't even working hard. They're not even working hard because no one's demanded it of them. And no one has instilled in them a desire for excellence. And if we don't do that, we're not going to get excellence. So the conditions have to develop highly effective teaching. Highly effective teaching because we need teachers who know how to bring out the best of our kids. We need teachers who get kids to overcome their fears. How many of you have a subject that you hated, you're no good at? And when did that first happen? For some of us, it happened quite a long time ago. And many of us still have that phobia. You know, ever since they brought in the X and the Y, said, that's done with math, right? I was cool with the numbers, but you didn't have to bring in the X and the Y, right? Or some people, they don't like to read. Or they don't like science, or whatever it is. Now, how many of you had a subject like that that you now love and that you're now good at? Because you had a teacher that turned you around. A teacher who took your fear and made it a strength. Anybody have a teacher like that? Think about those teachers and those learning experiences. I hope I see some hands. Anybody of you had a teacher like? All right, I'm glad to see that. Yes, let's hear it for the teachers. Here's what we know. I teach at UCLA. We have an excellent teacher education program. I'm sure Keene has one too. We produce excellent novices, not master teachers. You don't graduate as a master teacher, right? So where do you become a master teacher? In the classroom. But here's the problem. Teachers are working in isolation from each other. So we have brand new people working right next to people with more experience. And let's be clear, experience is no guarantee that you can be good. Because you can be doing it for a long time and still be a novice, right? Right? But here's the other challenge. Because we are working in isolation, and they're not working together and learning from each other, chances are they're not becoming experts at the craft. Right? And the craft of teaching does require art and skill. And so what are we doing to develop the art and skill of teaching? Right? so that we have highly effective teachers in more of our schools. Here's one of the problems, and this is where the school districts are at fault. Most districts will assign the least experienced teachers and the least effective teachers to teach which kids? The kids with the greatest needs. Wow, show me that research to back that one up. There is none. Here's the converse. Go to Fontana, a large district out in the middle of the desert in Southern California. 100% low income, 100% Latino, highest advanced placement scores in calculus in the county. I asked the superintendent, how do you do that? He said, well, we have an excellent calculus teacher. And we convinced him to start teaching 2 sections of 9th grade math. I said, why? He said, because until we did, we only had 6 or 7 kids in calculus. We had to build the cohorts of kids in the 9th grade who would be ready for algebra in the 12th grade. I mean, not calculus. You know what happens when your best calculus teacher, your best math teacher is doing something like that? It sends a message to the entire math department. We're not running away from the 9th graders. We're going to share that responsibility. Because if you don't share the responsibility, then you're going to continue to see the same disparities reproduced. So what are we doing to make sure that our teachers know what excellence is in teaching? What are we doing to raise their morale? I have never been to a high-performance school where teachers feel beaten down, where they feel abused and disrespected. Never seen one. You ever hear the saying, feed the teachers or they'll eat the children? It's true. Abuse trickles down. But the other side works too. If people feel good about what they're doing, it makes the kids feel good about it too. So morale is a key culture issue. Finally, what are you doing to get the kids to care about learning? What are you doing to get the kids, the students, invested? So they'll want to read. How many of these kids on their own are coming up to the teacher and say, you know, I love that book. Can you recommend another? Can you recommend another? When I was a kid growing up in Brooklyn, we lived in Brownsville. That's the part of Brooklyn that still hasn't gentrified. Right? On Saturdays, after we did our chores, my mother used to make us go to the library, as if this was a daycare center. Right? She just wanted us out of the house. Go to the library. Right? Fortunately for us, Mrs. McDonald was there, librarian, and she spent time with each one of us to find out what we were interested in. And after talking to her, she'd say, here's a book I want to suggest to you. Try this one. In 3rd grade, she recommended A Wrinkle in Time to me. How many read Wrinkle in Time? I would have never read that book because I judged a book by its cover. I didn't like the cover. But I liked Miss McDonald. I was back a week later and said, I'm ready for some more. I became an avid reader at 8 because of one book and one person who opened me to it. I'm sitting on the subway with my daughter riding from uptown in Washington Heights to her school downtown. She had been a struggling reader. I see her on the train, we're sitting together, and she's reading a book and crying. I said, what's wrong? She said, this book is so sad. I said, we should put it down. She said, I can't put it down. It's too good. She shows me the book. She says, it's a kite runner. How many of you read that one? Then she tells me the story about the kite runner. We're both crying by the time we get downtown. I said, this is really sad. I got to read that book. What does it take to get kids to read? How about good books? Wow. Books that you don't want to put down. I always tell my kids, you'll never be bored if you're a reader. Never. You'll always be entertained. You don't have to get on a video game. That's boring. Read a good book, kids. So equity is about understanding kids. Understanding how kids develop. You know that it used to be common across America for every kindergarten classroom to have a piano? And for the kindergarten teacher to know how to play it? Why? Because kids like music. And music's a great way to get kids to learn things. Do our kids still like music? Do you guys like music? How many of you know kids that have memorized the lyrics to hundreds of songs? What does that tell you about their capacity to learn? You know, one of the last things that people with Alzheimer's forget is the music of their youth. That's what they remember. They didn't forget who you are, even if you're their husband or wife. They remember the music of their youth. That's the kind of effect music has on us. Why is music one of the first things we cut as soon as the budget gets tight? Because it's not on the test. And art's not on the test. And recess is definitely not on the test. So we'll cut recess too. So I learned, a study said that eating lunch was good for test scores. I said, thank God. Thank God. They might take lunch away too. Our kids need a well-rounded education with lunch and recess and art and music and science and history. They need it all. They need it all. So child development reminds we have to be developmentally focused with the kids. What does it mean to teach middle school? How do we have to get those kids engaged? It reminds us too that the neuroscience is showing us that the brain is actually like a muscle. The term they use is neuroplasticity. The neurons connect when they're stimulated, which is why all kids have to be stimulated. All kids have to be challenged. Because if we want that brain to develop, we've got to actually work it. How often do the kids come at the end of the day saying, wow, what a day. I was inspired. Can't wait to go back. They're laughing too. I was at a high school in Los Angeles the other day. I asked that question to a group of students. Several kids said, every day. I said, every day? I was shocked. I said, well, tell me what you learned yesterday. Girl raised her hand. She said, we learned about forced sterilization of women in the 1930s. I went home and had to tell my father about it. We talked about it for 2 hours. What are we teaching our kids that would make them want to keep learning on their own? Because if we create kids that become independent, lifelong learners, wow, then we know we've done something, don't we? Finally, context is so key in all this work. Understanding the context, understanding what it's like, life is like outside of school. Who are the kids, the adults that are influencing our children? Who are the peers? Our kids don't live in school. And the more we know about who they are, the more we know about the communities they're in, the challenges they face, the more we'll know about how to serve them. So equity is complex. It's not simple. It does require knowing some things, especially knowing the kids. But the alternative is to keep doing what we've been doing. And what we've been doing is reproducing patterns of inequity. I go to some schools, they'll tell me, you know, we're really good with the kids whose parents are involved. We're really good with the kids. Basically what they want to tell me, we're really good with the kids who don't need much help. Right? We're good with those kids. That'd be like going to a doctor and say, you know, I'm really good if you're healthy already, right? Don't come in here if you're sick, though. I'm not good with sick people, right? Well, a lot of our schools are not good with kids who need help. And the evidence shows it. We got to be good for all kinds of kids. All kinds. We've got to be good at cultivating talent and strengths, which means we can't simply focus on deficits and weaknesses. Because if you build a child on a child's strengths, you help the child become more competent and more confident and ultimately more resilient, which is what we're after. And so equity is about all of that work. There are real obstacles that get in the way. Politics is a huge obstacle. Right? And I don't just mean the politics of Washington or of Trenton. I mean small school politics, right? Petty politics. Politics of blame. They get in the way. Traditions get in the way. This is always the way we've done things. Right? Our schedule. We always start school at 8 o'clock or 7:30. Why? Well, Moses told us this is the time. We must start school. And each period must be 43 minutes. That's the way we got to do things. Why? Even though we know half these kids are still asleep at 8 o'clock. They're not even awake. But that's our tradition. You know one of our traditions? If a kid acts out, you know what we do? Let's deny him some learning time. Let's send him to office. And if that doesn't work, let's just send them home to watch TV. That'll do it. That'll do it, right? They say, yeah, let's do that. This is how crazy it is. I'm visiting a school in Cleveland. Talking to the principal. Kid comes in, he says, you've been cutting school. He said, yeah. He said, you're going to get 3 days suspension. He said, give me 5 days this time. He said, okay, smart aleck, 5 days. Writes it up. Kid leaves. Turned to the principal and said, do you really think that's going to work? He says, it's not going to change the behavior, but it's going to get him out of my hair for 5 days. So ask yourself now, is part of your tradition to think that we can just weed out the bad kids? Put them out on the streets? Because the goal of discipline is not to punish kids. The goal of discipline is to do what? Change behavior. If you're punishing the same kids over and over again, you know what it means? It ain't working. That's what it means. Lawrence Kohlberg wrote about moral development in children. He said the goal of discipline should be to get kids to do the right thing even when we're not around. Think about that. That means it has to focus on character. It means it has to focus on values. Values are more important than rules. Believe me? If we teach respect, if we teach honesty, integrity, empathy, then you're not going to have fights. You're not going to have disrespect if the kids actually believe it. So, again, it might seem like this is not feasible, but I go to schools where these obstacles have been overcome. And I see this happening in places where the educators' beliefs are aligned with their goals. They actually believe they can do it. And because they do, the kids do. And it sounds simple, just like that garden. Right? The garden that's flourishing, right next to the garden that's not. In education, we have good research about what it takes, called the 5 essential ingredients for school improvement, based on research carried out at the University of Chicago, studies, reforms all over the country, said schools that have these 5 do well. Here are the 5. And tell me if you're surprised by any of them. First, a coherent instructional guidance system. What does that mean? It means teachers aren't doing their own thing. It means teachers are clear about what to be taught and how it should be taught. It means they're collaborating and working together. They're not isolated. Because you don't get coherence through isolation. Secondly, ongoing development of the professional capacity of the staff. Because as I said, universities don't produce master teachers. They produce novices. And here's the key. The skills of the teachers have to match the needs of the kids. If the teachers don't have the skills that the kids need, guess what happens? And you can see it in the achievement data, can't you? You see kids who can't read, you know what it means? Teachers don't know how to teach reading to them. Which means we actually have to teach teachers how to do those things. Third, strong parent-community ties. Research is very clear. Parents matter. They always do. Parents influence over 50% of student achievement. And if you don't believe me, look at your own data and ask yourself, how many of our high-achieving students have no parental support? And I'll bet you it's almost none. Because when there's reinforcement at home for what's happening in school, kids do better. That's what we know. What are you doing to get parents involved? All kinds of parents. What are you doing to build trust with parents so they actually believe we care about their kids? That's hard work, and that's also work universities aren't good at, teaching teachers how to do that. How do I talk to a parent? How do I convince the parent who comes in angry that I'm actually on your side? I want the same thing you do. If we can't build those relationships with our parents, then a critical part of the work to serve our kids well has been neglected. Fourth, a student-centered learning climate, a culture, student-centered culture, strong, positive relationships. Cultures are about values, they're about norms, relationships, shared vision, shared mission. It's how we do things. Every school has a culture. Every school has a culture. Some schools have a dysfunctional culture, a toxic culture, an anti-intellectual culture. Some schools have a culture that brings the best out of people. Fifth, shared leadership. Why shared? Because it's not about the superintendent or about a principal, it's about a team. A team that includes the teachers, that includes the custodian, that includes the receptionist, that includes everybody who's working at the site or in the district. Because if you get everybody working together, guess what happens? More impact. Right? More impact. So these are the 5. Ask yourself now, are you surprised by anything on the list? Say, wow, I'm really surprised that's up there. You know what's surprising? Why isn't the State Department of Education using this as a basis for helping schools? And tell them, you know what, this is what you should focus on. Right? Because your data suggests that maybe your teachers don't have the skills to actually teach those kids. Right? And we actually walk through your school, and the culture is not too cool. It's actually kind of crazy in there. What do we need to work on? I see schools that are struggling, and they actually don't even know what problem they're trying to fix. They're buying stuff. They're buying new technology. They got new iPads coming in. As if iPads is not on the list. You see iPads up there? No, not on the list. I'm not against technology. I'm just saying it's not one of the essential ingredients. Okay? We focus on the wrong things. We keep thinking there's a gimmick out there. If we just do something, just get that Common Core in here, that'll fix it all, right? There are no gimmicks. Never have been. So if we focus on the right things, we're going to start to get better results. So we don't have time for you to actually meet and talk about it, which would be helpful, because that's how we learn best, right? When we can interact and discuss and think together. But reflect. Where's your school at? Students, where's the school at you go to? How would you rate the school? On those 5. Don't have to give me the numbers. I don't want to embarrass anybody in there. But we don't get better by faking it, do we? No. We have to confront it and turn our weakness into strength. And so I want to now describe in more detail, what does it look like? What does it look like when there's a coherent system around instruction and guidance for teachers? Well, one of the things it looks like is students are empowered as learners. And you go into class time is work time. It's not sitting and listening. What's the number one complaint kids have about school? What's your number one complaint? Boring. Why? Because it is boring. Because too much sitting and listening. My friend Roland Tharks calls that the cemetery method of teaching. Line them up in rows, keep them as still as possible. It's deadly, isn't it? Why? Because kids don't learn that way. How do your kids learn? How do they learn? When you get a new video game, do you get a lecture on it first? No. What do you do when you get a new video game? What? Skip the tutorial and start playing. Why do you do that? Because you want to learn it. Do you make mistakes when you're doing that? Of course you do, but mistakes are okay, right? Part of learning. So they said this, they said they learn by doing, they learn through their mistakes, and if you get better and better, what happens to you? You just keep trying again? You don't advance to a higher level? Eventually, right? Because you master the game. You learn through mastery. Think about that. How many of our kids learn through mastery? How many of our kids can say, you know, I nailed fractions, I'm ready for decimals? You know? I nailed that 5-paragraph essay, I'm ready for a 5-pager now. You know what happens when you don't build a strong foundation? When kids don't experience mastery and get pushed along, they end up in high school reading at 3rd and 4th grade level, and they can't do more advanced work because they don't have the foundation. Here's what we got to do. We have to stop expecting kids to learn the way we teach and blaming them if they don't. You know what the alternative is? Teach them the way they learn. Teach them the way they learn. So what does it look like? That's what it looks like when we teach them the way they learn. This is a 90-minute math class. 90 minutes, that's a long time to be in math, isn't it? Oh, yes, it is. Except she found a way to make math fun. They were having so much fun doing algebra in 8th grade that when the bell rang, they were disturbed. They hadn't packed up 10 minutes early. Now think about what that teacher, she's so good she can stand in the back and talk to me. Because she doesn't have to hover over those kids. All these kids are poor. All these kids are recent immigrants. Many of them don't speak English as the first language. They come from a neighborhood with gangs. This is East Los Angeles. All kinds of problems. But they're doing high-level math in the 8th grade. And the teachers know, she knows they can. And what's more, because they're doing the math, they're not just learning math. What else are they learning? The social skills, right? They're learning how to work together. They're learning how to listen to each other. They're learning how to respect one another, because you can't work like this if you can't get along, can you? And because they're on task like this, what does she get to do? What does she get to do, teachers? She gets to talk. She gets to facilitate. She gets to differentiate support. She says, you guys are fine. Keep going. I'm going to work with this group. Or maybe you two need to work together because you can help each other. It actually makes her job easier, doesn't it? Right. But let's be clear, this is not easy to do. A lot of teachers look at a picture like that, they say they get scared. It's like watching a horror show. They say, ooh, that's frightening. Them kids up out of their seats. Because for some people, they look at a picture like that, they say chaos is around the corner. This is middle school. All you need is a fart in that room, and that whole thing, it blows up, right? But she's not worried about that. This is the highest form of classroom management. That's what it is. Why? Because they're engaged. And when kids are engaged, they're not distracted. They're not disruptive. So ask yourself, how many of our teachers can teach like this? And do we give those who can't a chance to see it? Because if you've never seen it, you think it can't be done. You think, not those kids. Those kids can't do that. Well, guess what? All our kids can. When they're provided an environment and a chance to do it. And when we stop focusing on achievement and start focusing on engagement. Here's a big problem in education. We focus on achievement as measured by test scores. I'm not saying ignore that, but that's the outcome. We got to focus on the means to get there. If you want to lose weight, would you get the best scale you could get and weigh yourself as often as you could? Or would you focus on diet and exercise? Because that's the means, right? Well, schools that are focused on engagement realize engagement is multidimensional. It's behavioral. That's the part you can see. Are they prepared? Are they there on time? Are they working? Do they submit the work? All very important. Insufficient. Because we also need to know, are they cognitively engaged? Do they actually understand it? Right? What does the work tell us about their reasoning, about their processing, about their acquiring the knowledge and skill that's essential? And finally, engagement is emotional. Do they care? Are they willing to try their best? Are they willing to work harder if they have to? When you focus on engagement, you get better results. You get better results because you can create classrooms like this. Classrooms where kids are actually invested as learners. So how do we do that? Well, we got to figure out, again, how do we make sure that we're teaching down here? Because what the learning period reminds us is the most effective way to learn is when you're doing this. The least effective way to learn is through lecture. That's the way the universities do it. That's the way I do it. I'm doing it right now. Why is it the least effective way? Because after a while you say, I got to go pick up the laundry today, and I got to get my kids, and I got so many things to do, and I got to get on my smartphone to see what's happening. I didn't even know what happened in the playoffs last night, and you get distracted. Right? When you are deeply engaged, when you're interacting, when you are on task, learning is deeper. It sticks more. And that's what we should be after. Learning that sticks. We want our kids to become lifelong learners. So we've got to focus on the evidence of learning, which means we've got to make the standards explicit and clear. We've got to expose students to high quality work. Let them know this is what we're after. I do that for my grad students. This is what an A looks like. What you turned in is not even close. Revise. Resubmit. Because the real learning doesn't happen on the first draft, does it? No. The real learning is in the revision. And the real teaching is not in the grading. It's in the feedback. That's where the real teaching happens. Now, some kids, they've been conditioned to be lazy. They say, oh man, I turned it in. I say, no, it's not good enough. Revise. I say, but Miss So-and-so accepts this kind of crap. I say, yeah, but I don't. I expect more of you. And I realize some students are not going to want to be pushed. Because it's like having to run a mile when all you've run is 100 yards. You could be tired because you haven't had to work. But we got to get our kids working again, right? Learning again, which is why we've got to be focused on the evidence. Because imagine what would happen if our kids were in schools where that was happening from preschool all the way through 12th grade. By 12th grade, it would be easy, wouldn't it? It would be easy because they'd already been conditioned to have the self-discipline as learners. So to get there, we've got to actually get teachers meeting together, planning together, analyzing student work together. Why? Because isolation is the worst obstacle to good teaching. I can't tell you if I go to a school where there's highly effective teachers right next door to highly ineffective teachers. And it's so sad because the answer to the problem is right next door. But we're not good at letting that teacher see what it looks like. So we got to close that gap. So I want you to think about what are we doing to get our students motivated and engaged? What are we doing to get our teachers clear about what highly effective teaching looks like? And what are we doing to address race and class and language and cultural barriers so our teachers are good at teaching all kinds of kids, not just kids who are like them? Here's the good news on that point. Our kids are less prejudiced, less biased than the adults. Kids will learn from anybody who cares about them. Believe me? Ask the kids. When you ask kids, consistently, the research shows, name the best teachers. They don't talk about race, they talk about the person and how that person works with them. So don't use race as an excuse not to do this work. We got to be clear, all of our kids can achieve, and our teachers can too, if they can grow as people and overcome their own biases so they can actually believe in the children that are in their schools. And so, to get there, we've got to build the capacity of our staff. We got to make sure that the skills of our staff and the resources in our schools match the needs of our students. Here's a place that's done it. Brockton High School, Massachusetts. Largest high school in the state, over 4,200 students. One of 2 urban high schools that gets a level 1 rating by the state. And Massachusetts is the top performing state in the country. Now, Brockton is a great place to do this because Brockton was called a cesspool in 1998 by the state, by the Boston Globe. Said it's the worst high school in the state. They had done the state exam, and in Massachusetts, you don't pass the state exam, you don't get a diploma. And the projection was in 1998 that 75% of the kids would not pass the state exam. So a group of veteran teachers went to their principal, Sue Satchowitz. They said, Sue, the only way our kids can pass this exam is if every teacher becomes a teacher of literacy. We have to have literacy across the curriculum, regardless math, science, because guess what? If you can't read and write in high school, you can't do math. You can't do science. So the principal said, good idea, but I can't make the teachers do it. Said, well, we don't have to make them. We'll work with those who are ready right now. We'll start there. And then we'll win the others over. She said, but I can't pay you to do this. She said, we think it's the right thing to do, so you don't have to pay us. We'll do it on our own time. This is a heavily unionized district. Don't use unions as your excuse for not doing the work. Okay? (1998) 75% of the kids are failing. By 2002, 50% of the kids have passed. So, literacy works. Let's stick with it. By 2006, 80% of the kids. Since 2010, over 90% of the students in Brockton High School pass the state exam. Over 1/3 of the senior class gets the highest possible score. That gives them a free scholarship to any public university in the state. And the demographics of the kids who pass match the demographics of the school. Right. What's the secret? Shared leadership. It wasn't just about the principal. She was a leader. It was about that team. Sue Satchowitz contacted me. She said, Pedro, I'm retiring 3 years ago. I said, you worried? She said, not at all. She said, because the teachers own this, not me. Since she's left, the schools continue to increase in the performance. They had a strategy to get buy-in. Because right away, not everybody was on board. Some teachers said, no, I ain't doing it. I'm a PE teacher. I'm not doing literacy. What you talking about? Say, okay, we'll work with those who are ready. You know what happens when you start to succeed? Even the outliers start to say, damn, I better do literacy now. Right? Since it works, success breeds success. They had a coherent strategy focused around student need. They didn't sit around saying, you know what, it's the middle school's fault. They could have, right? Because it was true. The problem didn't start in high school. The problem started before high school. But what would have happened if they had sat around blaming the middle schools? They'd still be right where they were. Said, we're going to meet the kids where they are. Right? That's what we're going to do. They differentiated professional development for teachers. Why? Because they're not all the same, just like the kids. Some teachers have weak content knowledge. They actually need to know more of the subject they teach. Some people have weak pedagogical skills. They only know how to teach one way. And some people don't know how to build relationships. So what do our teachers need to work on? Do our teachers have input into their professional development plans? They do at Brockton. Finally, they kept looking at the evidence and asking, is it working? Are we making progress? If it is, let's keep doing it. Let's tweak it. Let's try something else to get further and further ahead. Here's the Boston Globe. 11 years later, it said Brockton High School has every excuse for failure, serving a city plagued by crime, poverty, housing foreclosures, and homelessness. But Brockton High, by far the state's largest public high school with 4,200 students, has found success in recent years that has eluded many of the state's urban schools. MCAS scores are soaring, earning the school state recognition as a symbol of urban hope. It is still a symbol. Now, if you could do that in Brockton, you know what Brockton is known for? Brockton is known for fighting. That's what they're known for. If you Google, you will find 3 years ago they had a big fight at the graduation. Parents, kids, all fighting. They're still fighting in Brockton. Rocky Marciano came from Brockton. They got a statue of a boxer out front. Marvin Hagler came from Brockton. But they're also known for writing now, too. Right? They're known for getting kids into college. They don't allow the fact that they come from a poor neighborhood to be an excuse for not having a great high school. So if you can do it in Brockton, can you do that in Newark? Can you do that in Asbury Park? Can we do that in Camden? Can we do that in Trenton? Can we do that in New Jersey? One of the states in the country. New Jersey is an envy to the rest of the country. You know why? You spend more money on your schools than almost any other state. California looks at you like, whoa. We have 37, 38 kids in the classroom. We don't even spend half as much per pupil in California as we do in New Jersey. Does money matter? I think so. It should. Question is, what do we get for the money? Right, that's the question. So I want you to think about, we don't have time to discuss it, but think about it. What should your school, what should your district be focused on? What are the problems we face? What's getting in the way of better performance? Are we clear? Do we know? And what should we do? What strategy should we take to change it? Brockton, they seized on it. They said, we're going to do literacy. Every kid, regardless of the subject, is going to be reading and writing. Every teacher's going to know how to teach it. They had a strategy. And it didn't happen overnight. It was a long-term strategy. Right? They've been working on it now for almost 20 years. They're still sticking with it. Change doesn't happen overnight. Third, how are we doing to time, Pete? It was good? Okay. Parent-community ties. I talked about already. Parents matter. What are we doing to build trust? What are we doing to build partnerships to close the gap between school and home? Research says when we get the parents involved, it can make a huge difference. That's what PS 28 did in Brooklyn. PS 28, that's, we have fancy names for our schools in New York City, right? It's in Bevis-Stuyvesant. And Sadie Silver, the principal featured in that picture, for having the highest gains in scores in 2012, invited me to her school. Said, Pedro, I want you to come visit. I want you to see a high-performing, high-poverty school. And because I came from Brownsville, which is not far from Bed-Stuy, I said, well, I got to come see this. So I get there, and the first person she introduced me to is her secretary. So I said, I want you to meet the person who does all the administrative work. She's running the school. She's a super secretary. I said, well, then what do you do? She said, I'm the lead teacher. I didn't become a principal to escape the classroom. She said, come on, let's go visit some classrooms. We go into classrooms, and first thing I notice is every classroom has 4 or 5 adults in it. So I said, where do you get all these teachers from? She said, they're not all teachers. I said, most of them are parents we've trained to volunteer to work with teachers. I said, do you pay them? She said, I have no money to pay them. So I kept asking parents, why do you volunteer? She said, oh, because my kids are here. I have time. My kids are here. I want to be here. And some of them just make copies. Some of them escort a kid to the bathroom. I see one parent, she's standing very close to a little boy. I asked the principal, why is she so close to that boy? I said, well, he's very restless. He has trouble sitting still. And we're glad she's here. The school works through a series of partnerships. Partnership with parents, partnership with the YMCA. They provide after-school support because 30% of the kids are homeless. And she wants to make sure the kids are not on the streets in the cold. So after school, they're getting art and music and homework help, swimming lessons. Here's another partnership with a job training agency. They provide parents who want it GED classes, job training, on-site. She believes if the parents are educated and employed, they'll do a better job with the kids. Another partnership with the hospital. They provide services on-site, health, dental, eye exams. I sat in as 2 social workers from the hospital were running a workshop for teachers on how to respond to the social and emotional needs of children. Teachers were presenting problems. They said, I got a kid who's aggressive, he's fighting. Another one said, I got a kid with anxiety disorders. Another one got a kid who's depressed. One teacher said, I have a child with attachment issues. He's attached to my leg, and I can't teach. In every case, the social workers are giving practical suggestions. Try this, get them to earn your attention, come back tomorrow, let us know if it worked. I asked Sadie, why are you offering this as a form of training for your teachers? She said, because until I did, they were referring too many kids to special ed. My teachers have to be more skilled because their needs are greater. She said, let me introduce you to my counselor. We walked down the hall. She said, I got to warn you, though, I got him from the rubber room. Now, those of you who don't know, New York City has a place called the rubber room, where they put teachers or administrators who've been written up for some kind of offense. They get paid, but they just sit in that room doing crossword puzzles. You want to go there? I said, how do you know to get this man from the rubber room? She said, well, I don't know why he was there in the first place, but he had been my guidance counselor when I was a kid. And he saved my life, so I knew he was good. So I asked for him. They said, you could have him. So I go and I meet the counselor. It was an older man, and this little boy he's talking to is about 7 or 8 years old. I asked the little boy, why are you here? He says, I'm here to learn how to be good. So I said, is it working? I said, I hope so. I'm tired of being put out of class. I said, what's this about? They said, well, we have a no suspension policy at this school. We don't think it's effective to just send them home. So we actually do focus on helping children to be responsible for their behavior. That's their goal. So I tell Sadie, you know, I'm so impressed by what I'm seeing. I'm going to write to the chancellor, who at the time was Joel Klein. I'm going to write him about my visit to your school. She said, well, if you're going to be in touch with the chancellor, come here. She takes me to her office, and there's a big table with chairs. I said, what happens here? She said, I told you I was the lead teacher. I work all day with kids that the teachers struggle with. They come to me. And then every child at the school has a learning plan, personalized to meet their needs. And she demonstrates what's in the plans. So I do write to the chancellor, and I tell him about my visit to 28, and to his credit, 3 days later, he shows up. And he visits the school, and he's so impressed, he writes about it in a memo. He sends it out to every principal in New York City. That's over 1,800 principals. Except the only thing he mentions was the data system she was using to monitor student performance. And then I write to him, I said, Joel, I'm so glad you visited, but you missed it. Because it's not the data system that makes this work. It's all those things that come together, right, that allow a school like that to get such good results. What's the key? Instructional leadership. She's in the classroom. Anytime I go to a school and I see the principal in their office, I say, well, what's happening here? Because nobody's learning in the office, right? If you're not involved in the most important work in the school, then guess what? You are irrelevant to the most important work going on in your school, which is happening in the classroom. Right? Parental support. Why? Because despite the fact that parents are poor, those parents can play a role, those parents can be involved, those parents can help. Community partnerships. Because the kids need more. They need health care. They need after-school support. They need it. They need more than your affluent kids if they're going to have a chance to catch up. And Sadie knew if she sat in her office just waiting for someone to help her, you think they'd have helped her? No. No one's going to help you. She went and got the help. She's resourceful. She wrote the grant with the hospital. She went out to the Y and said, come to my school. Partner with me. Great principals don't wait. They make it happen. Building the capacity of the teachers. And finally, individualized support for the students. She knows the kids. She knows what they need. She's monitoring their progress. Schools like that don't just succeed because of goodwill. They succeed because of good work. And the good news is there are lots of schools like these. Read Karen Chenoweth. It's being done on her second book, How It's Being Done. She profiles lots of these schools. Go to the Education Trust website and you will see hundreds of these schools across the country. All of which show us the problem is not the kids. The problem is the way we treat the kids. The problem is our inability to create those conditions that allow kids to learn and to be successful. So when we build these partnerships, let's be clear, it's about respect, it's about trust, it's about recognition, it's shared interest. We want the same thing the parents want. Not easy to do, but essential if we're going to get better results. Finally, school culture. I say finally because I think it's talking too long. And I said already several times, it is about that learning environment. So let me give you an example of a school that actually knows the kids, knows what they need, knows how they learn outside of school, knows what's going on in their lives. This is David Banks. David is the CEO of Eagle Academy. There are now 5 of those schools, including one in Newark. David was an attorney before he became a principal. He was a defense attorney. And he's watching lots of young men going off to prison all the time. He's from the South Bronx. He said, I need to create a school where the culture of the school is more powerful than the culture of the streets. because he understood too many of these young men were dying from violence and being locked up. So what does he do? He creates a school in the South Bronx, which incidentally, the first school is right next to the courthouse. So every day the kids can see men coming in being arraigned to get off to Rikers Island. First time I learned about Eagle Academy was on the train. Anybody who takes a train in New York knows the worst time to take the train is when? 3:30. Oh, he said the morning's bad. Afternoon when kids get out is really bad because they're excited. It's crowded. They're loud. There I was, headed uptown in a loud, crowded car. But I see three young men in ties like these students over here today. I assumed they must be Mormons. We had a lot of Mormons in the area, Jehovah's Witnesses, one or the other. And I see one, he offers his seat to a pregnant woman. So I said, definitely Mormons, right? I go over to ask, where they were going. They said, no, we're from Eagle Academy. We're not Mormons. And we're just coming from the Museum of Natural History, headed back to the Bronx. I said, well, where's your teacher? I said, we know how to get to the Bronx ourselves. We do it every day. I said, well, who taught you to give up your seat like that? He said, well, that's the Eagle way. The Eagle way. Remember what I said about Kohlberg? He said, the goal of discipline is to teach the kids to do what's right even when we're not around. That's what I was seeing. So I go visit Eagle Academy. I want to learn about the Eagle Way. What's the Eagle Way? Well, Eagle Way is about extending learning. Their strategy to counter gangs is keep the kids so busy at school doing things kids like, they have no time for gangs. You know what the research shows? Kids who are involved in music, in theater, in sports, do better than kids who are not involved. Why? Why? Why do the kids who are involved do better than the kids who are not involved? Kids? You don't know. How many of you are involved? How many play a sport? How many play music? Not enough hands. Theater. Newspaper. Problem. They got some over here. Why? Because when you're involved in those activities, you're also developing discipline. You know, I got to be there. I got to be part of this. You're learning teamwork. You're learning persistence and grit. You're getting all that through those activities. These kids are, every kid at Eagle has got to be in a club. Got to be. And every student at Eagle has a mentor. An adult mentor. They said, you need somebody watching out for these kids and who's an advocate for them. When I went to the induction ceremony, all the ninth graders come to an auditorium like this for an induction ceremony to learn about the school, and the induction ceremony is run by the 12th graders. They let them know this is what it means to be an Eagle. This is how we wear our ties. This is how you tie a tie, because a lot of those 14-year-olds never did. At the end of the induction ceremony, Tuskegee Airmen come in. Right? These men are in their 80s and 90s, and a lot of them are crippled. Right? Why bring in the Tuskegee Airmen? Because they want the kids to know you're part of a legacy of greatness. Right? This school is trying to inspire them. And this school says, you know what? These are boys. So we got to find ways to make learning fun. We got to make math fun. We got to make science fun. We got to get them engaged and empowered as learners. And so a school started right next to a jail, right next to a courthouse, becomes a beacon of hope in the community. And so again, if you could do that in the South Bronx, you could do that here. You can do that if you understand the difference between grit and agency. Because what they're developing at Eagle is not simply grit, though grit is part of it. Those kids know how to work hard, but they're also developing kids who can think critically about who they are, about their place in the world. They're developing kids who know how to get help when they need it, building social capital. That's why they have mentors. They're helping kids to understand that, yes, there are real barriers, but together we can strategize about how to overcome the barriers. We don't have to give up. And because they're doing that, they're seeing kids who, based on their backgrounds, you wouldn't expect to see in college, but they're going. Because they're in a school that's committed to building that pathway to opportunity. So let me close, because I know I've been talking too long. I would say this. If we change the questions we're focused on, we're going to get different results. Instead of focusing on raising achievement, we should be focused on how to get kids excited about learning. Because if the kids are excited about learning, guess what happens? Achievement goes up. And if the teachers focus on getting them there, that means teachers can become much more creative, right, than it is in many of our schools. How do we get kids and teachers empowered to do this work? We need a different vision, and we need some good books to read. So here's my plug for Lee and Low. What are your kids reading? What are they reading? There's a whole collection of books out there that we know from research, we know from kids themselves. They respond to it. So let me close with this. Yet another school story. This is a school in the Bronx, in the South Bronx too. It's part of the Bronx where my grandmother lived for over 20 years on Willis Avenue, so I knew the neighborhood well. It's a part of the Bronx that burned in the 1970s. I get invited to go visit PS 138. So I show up. I'm greeted by a third grader. She says, I'm your tour guide. I said, let's go. First thing she takes me to is the bulletin board, show me all the awards the school's won. It's been recognized by the state for several years. Articles written about it. Then she takes me, she said, let me show you the library. The library is immaculate because kids are reading and they're working. And then there's student work on the walls. The kids publish a newsletter with essays and poetry. I had to buy several copies while I was there. There are plants in the school in the hallway. And I'm just impressed by how immaculate it is. Again, in the South Bronx, this school is just this oasis. I said, I'm so impressed. She said, well, you haven't seen anything yet. She said, let's go upstairs. We go upstairs, and I learned the only museum in New York City dedicated to the history of the Bronx is in their school. It's a museum dedicated to the history of the Bronx, but it's not locked away in a classroom. It's in the hallways. There's a picture of the Yankees from the 1920s. A picture of the Bronx family. Who knew? German family, spelled their name with a K. Owned a big farm. Picture of Joe Louis when he fought Max Schmeling. First album by Donald Byrd, in glass. Album by Willie Colon, in glass. Why? They want the students to know the Bronx produces great people. You can be capable of greatness too. And as I walk through the halls and I see the memorabilia, first thing that comes to my mind is that this is all within easy reach of children. Children could vandalize it, they could break it. So I turned to the little girl, I said, aren't they worried that kids might destroy some of this? She looks at me like I'm some kind of sicko. She said, I don't know about the schools you go to normally, but at this school, kids take care of things. Why do I ask the question? Because I'm so accustomed to going to schools where kids are not trusted. I'm accustomed to going to schools now that where in the name of safety, the school looks like a prison, where kids are marching through the halls in silence because they can't be trusted to walk through the halls on their own. School like the one I visited in Oakland, where in an 8th grade science classroom, there's no science equipment. And I asked the teacher, why no science equipment? She said, because I lock it up. I said, why? She said, so they don't break it. I said, do they ever get to use it? She said, occasionally. If they're good, I'll bring out the science equipment. And I could tell by the way she said it, that didn't happen often. You ever go to someone's house and they got their furniture covered? Like they're waiting for someone special to come, then they're going to take it off, right? And it's covered. When you visit, that means you're not the special one, right? Well, the kids at 138 treat like they're special, and they respond. Because they understand the kids will rise to the level of our expectations. I wish you all the best. Thank you.
One, two. I know from the size of this room that we could do a better round of applause for Pedro Noguera. Give it up. We are going to have a signing for Pedro's book, Excellence Through Equity, in room 115. For those of you that wish to purchase a copy of his book, you could come to our table where registration was. There's a table set up, and we'll be selling we only have 50 copies to sell. So for those of you that want a copy, I would get online. It's going to be first come, first serve. And then you can come into room 115 where you can have the book dedicated and signed by Pedro. So I thank you for that. Once again, a big shout out to Asbury Park and a thunderous round of applause for Kane for helping us host. I am now going to give the mic to Dr. Pittman.
Thank you, Abe. Thank you, everyone. So just a couple of housekeeping items. If you haven't already discovered, free Wi-Fi is available at the Kane University Open Air. If you go into your settings, you will find that listing there. We also want to announce, as a part of the program, we included inserts for a special session for superintendents with Dr. Waite. That information is in your packet. Professional development hour certificates will be made available at the end of the conference around 3:15. Please check at the registration table to secure your certificates. And as a lunch option, we have just been informed that Aubonne is making themselves available to us today on an initial operating schedule. So if you're interested in that bread place, then you're welcome to patronize them. At this point, there are optional activities that are available to you. They're listed in your program booklets. If you have questions, then please stop by the registration table. Thank you so much. The breakout sessions will begin promptly at 1:30. We need you to please continue tweeting. Thank you. Have a great day, folks.